Again, I'm Robin Fahr, and I work at Channel 30. I host a show called Conversations, and your speaker today has been a guest on my show twice, and I've actually seen his presentation 4 times, so I know what you're in for today. It's a real treat. I wish I could stay for this 5th time, but I have to run home to a funeral. I was recalling how a time when I was in high school, our teacher decided that we should all watch this TV miniseries called The Holocaust. And it was on for 2 weeks, I believe. And I could not get through the first night. It was, man's inhumanity to man was just too much for me. And I went back to my teacher the next day and I said, can we do anything? I know this happened, it's just a horrible thing, but can I do something else? And we came up with some sort of a project for me that would make up for my missing watching the miniseries that I just could not handle. And I'm just now thinking back about that time, if I'd had somebody like Marty Brounstein, or if I'd had his book, that might have been the answer. I could have still gotten all the information I needed without feeling so horrible about it. Let me tell you a little bit about Marty. Marty Brounstein brings us a true interfaith story of courage, compassion, and rescue. It's conveyed through his book, Two Among the Righteous Few, a story of courage in the Holocaust. In fact, sharing this story has put Marty on quite a journey, for since the fall of 2011, Marty has been speaking in a wide variety of venues on this book throughout the Bay Area and actually all around the country. Interestingly enough, this book is not Marty's normal work. Based in San Mateo, Marty has led the management consulting firm, the Practical Solutions Group, since 1991, serving a wide variety of clients across many industries on issues of leadership and organizational effectiveness. Through this work, he has written 8 management-related books, from contributing author to sole author, including Communicating Effectively for Dummies, Coaching and Mentoring for Dummies, and Managing Teams for Dummies. His 9th book, the focus of this presentation, is quite different and special. It takes Marty back to his early career as an educator and when he was teaching history, including the Holocaust. This true and remarkable story has a meaningful personal connection as well, which Marty will reveal at the end of his talk. Books will be available for sale and signing, and they are just $13. So please, let's give a warm welcome to Marty Brounstein.
Good afternoon, everyone. Not bad, not bad. Just get ready. I'm going to take you on a journey into a remarkable story this afternoon. And to start this journey, I want you to be thinking about 3 questions. Question number 1. Would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger? Think about that for a moment. It's actually a tough question. Question 2. Would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger? Would you still help? And question 3. Would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger? When these people who most need the help, most everybody else wants to hate them or be indifferent to their plight, would you still get involved and help? And as you see the book up here, Two Among the Righteous Few, a story of courage in the Holocaust, is a true story of a Christian couple that answered a definite yes to all 3 of those questions in a time period when most everybody else said no. They are true heroes. And I always say to give this book its just due, I should say its title is this: Twee tussen de rechtvaardige enkelen en verhaal van moed in de Holocaust. That's the title of this book, translated into Dutch. For the story takes place in the Netherlands, commonly referred to as Holland, during World War II and the Holocaust. And this couple was just a young married couple. We'll go next slide to introduce you to them now. That's them, Franz and Mien Weinacher. That's a picture of them at the end of World War II. And in brief, who were they? Next slide, please. That's who they were. And you see the top line there. Nothing special about them. They were not college educated, no inventions to their name, no great success in business or any other ventures. In fact, if you went in the Netherlands today, travel around the country to any major city, and you went up to the average Dutch citizen and said, please tell me about Franz and Mien Weinacher, here's what most would say. Well, I don't know who they are. But you see the second line. at one point in their life, they're going to do something so extraordinary that it teaches us lessons for our lives today and for the future. And that's what's kept my journey going with this story. And today, as we'll go to the next slide to see their picture again, as you're going to learn about this very special couple, Brounstein and Fahr, what I'm going to do first in my presentation is I'm going to be telling you a story. Is I'm going to paint the historical picture in which the story takes place in first. World War II in Europe, the Holocaust, and life in the Netherlands during World War II when it was under Nazi Germany occupation, the worst of all the countries in Western Europe. That picture I'll paint first will help you understand even more so when I talk about who they were and what they end up doing that later will earn them a heroic honor. You're going to see how remarkable and unusual that was. And the last thing that I'll cover in my presentation is I also have a very meaningful personal connection to the story and its heroes. But I always save that to last, and then your questions will be welcome from there, and yes, books will be available if you want to come up and visit afterwards. So let me give a quick pause before I get into it. This is actually a story I stumbled into by accident on a trip to the Netherlands in May of 2009. And if you've gone into my life before that, as you heard in the nice introduction, I've had this management consulting business for 25 years. And you said to me, one day you're going to write a book about this couple named Franz and Weinacher. I probably would have looked at you kind of strange and funny, like, who are they and why would I do that? But not only did I end up writing about a book about this couple and found a publisher for it, but when the book came out, it has sent me on this unexpected journey. This journey now is well into 5 years. Never would have expected it. 450 or so events, we lose count now. Dozen or so cities. I'm on my way to Long Island, New York, for Holocaust Remembrance Day, May 4th out there next week. And what's been neat along the journey, and hopefully some of you will become that way, I've actually had people be supporters. So one, of course, you just met her, Robin Fahr here. Thank you, Robin. I know she had to go for a personal family issue. But in particular, she helped connect me here, and when this gentleman here said, wow, I like this story, I want you to come share it in my library. Thank you, Paul Sevilla, for organizing the book. And actually, one of the people who've been a supporters for me on this journey over the last 5 years, she and her husband, unfortunately he's on duty in Hawaii right now, not a bad place to be. She's here today, brought a friend with her, and she's kept in touch and helped spread the word to others when I have events periodically. Thank you to Tracy Montalani back there. Wave your hand, Tracy. Thank you for being here. So hopefully you'll become those supporters as well. And that's what kept this journey going. Never would have expected it. Well, now I'm going to get you into the story. And we're going to see what you know about your history. Guesses are welcome as I'll throw out a few questions. Don't worry if it's not right. By the way, if it's correct, see Paul Sevilla for prizes afterwards here. So my first question, I said the story takes place during World War II in Europe. When does World War II in Europe begin and where?
1933.
Yeah, 39, September 1st, 39 in Poland is exactly right. And a country on September 1st of 1939 invaded Poland. What country? There we go. The other powers of Europe at that time, Britain and France, declared war against Germany because of that invasion. Boom! World War II breaks out. And the Poles were very excited because the British and the French are going to come help us against those nasty Germans. And they didn't. And by the end of September, Poland had fallen. And the war actually stopped for a period of time. In fact, if you looked at newspaper headlines around the world over the next 6+ months or so, a headline you would sometimes see was this: phony war. This war must not be real, because Britain and France said they're going to attack Germany because of that invasion, and they sat there. But this war will not just stay quiet with a few countries involved. By spring of 1940, it starts erupting again in Europe, and keeps erupting, and finally ends in Europe when? 1945, very good. What month? May of 45, yes, very good. History teacher in here? Oh, no. That's okay. Yeah. There we go, sneaker is in there, but that's all right. Very good, very good. May of 45, it finally ends in Europe. August 45, when Japan and Asia surrenders, it's finally done worldwide. World War II. Still true today with all wars that came before it and all wars that have come since. When it was finally over, it is the most destructive war in humankind's history by far. When it's finally over, you're going to end up with over 60 countries committing troops into this war, billions of dollars of property damage worldwide, and over 50 million people are going to die worldwide in this awful war, the most by far ever. And one of the things that we saw in this war more than we had ever seen in wars before, more common unfortunately since, is more than half of that 50 million plus figure will be civilians. So it's not just soldiers dying at a high rate. By the way, one exception to that, is this country will commit lots of soldiers into the war. We'll have over 400,000 of its soldiers die, but will not have civilian casualties. What country am I referring to? That's right, it wasn't fought on our soil. Americans often don't quite get that, but that's not true if you lived on the continent of Europe. Every country in Europe during this 5+ year time period, 30+ that are there, are going to be terribly impacted. In fact, for the average citizen of Europe during this 5+ year time period, your life was basically a nightmare trying to survive. And that's where Franz and me live. You don't want to be there. Now, the next question, we look at the greater historical picture behind the story. Holocaust, capital H, the event. It gets its beginnings in 1933. In what country?
Germany.
Very good. This is the start. This part always frightens me when I explain it. At the start of 1933, Germany was actually a democracy. And through the democratic process, this man gets appointed chancellor, equivalent to prime minister. Wait till I ask the question. Hold on. Very good, very good. And a short time after taking that position, he creates excuses to throw democracy out the window. One-party dictatorship rule takes over Germany, and the persecution that becomes part of the Holocaust begins right away. Of course, who am I talking about? There we go, Adolf Hitler. But the Holocaust will not just stay in Germany. Before the war breaks out in Europe in September of 1939, it's already spread into Austria, and then into Czechoslovakia, and then when the war breaks out, it's going to spread throughout all of Europe, into North Africa, and the Holocaust finally ends when? 1945, in what month?
May.
May, very good. When World War II ended in May of 45, the Holocaust ended. Two separate events that are going to end up happening on simultaneous tracks. In one sentence, please define, what was the Holocaust? That works very well. She said systematic murder of Jews. Very good, very good. Now let me put this in front of them. Right on track. This was a nation-sponsored, systematic and racist effort to persecute, isolate, and then mass murder millions of people on Adolf Hitler's list of so-called undesirables or inferiors. When the Holocaust was finally over after 12+ years, you're going to have over 11 million people murdered in the Holocaust, on top of what's happening in the war itself. And as this lady said here, #1 target on the list was whom? There are going to be 6 million out of that 11 million plus. When you look at that number alone, which is so frightening, that's nearly 3/4 the population of the Bay Area today. And if you go to Europe at the start of 1933, before the Holocaust begins, that was nearly 2. And of every 3 European Jew who lived on the continent then, that will not be alive by May of 1945. The other 5 million plus victims in the Holocaust, who were some of them?
Gypsies.
Gypsies, yes. Keep going.
Witness.
Homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mentally ill.
Very good, very good. Good list, good list.
Physically impaired.
Physically impaired, yes. It was a big list.
Communist.
Very much communist. People of Slavic heritage, which takes in a number of nationalities from much of Europe. Non-Jewish Poles were the largest group of victims out of that. And any kind of political dissident. Hitler did not see religion. Jehovah's Witnesses were not victims because of their religion. They were speaking out against this. They were not marching in line in Germany. Oh, you became a target. It was a big list. And even that, here's one other group I'll throw in there among many. Generally speaking, not fully, but better than Japan, Germany, when they got prisoners of war through World War II, generally honored the Geneva War Convention rules of how you treat prisoners of war, except for prisoners that they captured from the Red Army. Who was the Red Army?
Russia.
Not called Russia. Russia's the state within it, called USSR, Soviet Union. Many of those soldiers captured in battle were thrown in the concentration camps and became victims of the Holocaust. Big list. Jews being the top target on that list. And if you're on that list during this time period, not only is your life a nightmare trying to survive, it's doomed, and in most cases you don't know it before it's too late. You will get captured and you'll get murdered. But some people figure out in the 1930s, before the war even breaks out, that doom is coming. And a refugee crisis starts to break out in Europe in the 1930s. And it only gets worse when the war breaks out and spreads throughout the whole continent. And if you were one of those refugees, in dire need, knowing that I got to get out of here, and you sought the help of many governments in this time period, many could have helped. Here's a few that could have helped most of all for these refugees. Canada, United States, Great Britain. How many governments were willing to help these refugees in dire need?
No.
Yeah, that's right. We're not going to see much from governments.
No.
You're only going to see a handful of people throughout the whole continent of Europe, let alone the world, that'll have the courage you can have to say, this is wrong and I should try to help. This couple, Franz and Weinacher, were among those few. So remarkable and unfortunately unusual. Now my last main question, as we look at the greater historical picture behind this story, let's go to when the United States enters World War II. When was that? 1941. And to be exact, December 8th of 41, because of what happened on December 7th, which was? Americans know that one well. Japan attacked our naval base, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii there. Good museum today. And on December 8th, 1941, because of that attack, President Franklin Roosevelt declares war against Japan. We're finally going to enter this war. And by the way, at the time we then declared war against Japan, Japan happened to be part of this military alliance known as the Axis powers, with Italy and Germany. And they said, since you declared war against our buddy here, Japan, the United States, we're declaring war against you. And we said, okay, vice versa today. We're finally going to enter World War II, which now I take it back to Europe. It's already over 2 years old in Europe. Late 1941, early 1942. What's the situation of the war in Europe at this time? What's happened? Who's winning? The Germans are winning, and how much?
By far.
I love that great summary. Yeah, that's it. By far summarizes it very well. Good big words. And there's other allies that have actually joined the Axis with the Germans and Italians too. In fact, they're winning so much in Europe. How many countries in Europe are still standing trying to fight the Germans and their allies? How many are left? Great Britain is one. Any others? I don't mind the French in this. Mighty France, when they came under attack from the Germans, surrendered in less than a month. Don't remind them of that. They don't like that. So France, gone. Any others? They're one of the so-called neutrals. We're going to talk a little bit more that about 40,000 Spaniards will sign up and serve with the Germans anyway. But they're neutral, so they're not under attack. Switzerland's one of the neutrals. We'll show you a map here in a moment. There's actually 2 left. Well, let's go to the next to show you the map, and then we'll help you answer those questions. All right, let me tell you what you're seeing on the map here in terms of the different colors. In the southern part, the little more darker gray, are other countries that have joined the Axis of Power Alliance, like Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, so they're fighting with the Germans. Once you see the lighter white color, there's Spain and Portugal, Switzerland in the middle, Sweden up north, here's Turkey over in the Far East. The so-called neutrals, so they're not taking sides and fighting. But guess what all the neutrals are doing at this point? They're actively supplying the Germans with war material needs. Spaniards have even had some people volunteer to go fight with them too. Hoping the Germans don't change their mind and attack them too. And the rest of this continent has now been occupied by Nazi Germany. Nearly 20 countries with others helping them. This whole continent is pretty much under the grip of Nazi Germany, the world's most frightening time in history. Of what's left, and you see to the west, the very dark. There's Great Britain that was mentioned. And I'll tell you about who the other one is in a moment. But let's talk Britain for a moment. How many people, a year ago, he's already out of power at this point.
This is after you trying to make the peace?
No, it's a little bit later now. Churchill is the prime minister at this point. Let's go to how many people, and this is started in 1942, saw, and a year ago, should have won the Academy Award, The Imitation Game.
Oh, it's fabulous.
Excellent, excellent. All right, for those who saw it, about half this room, talk to me for a moment. At the start of that movie, you've got a clear picture of what life was like in Great Britain at this time in the war before the United States has really shown up. How were they doing? I love you really summarized well. Yes, not very well at all. They have been bombed and battered repeatedly at this point. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, is trying to rally the spirits of the British people who are nervous because they're wondering when German forces are going to come across the North Sea and start invading with their troops. And they're going, come on, United States, get in here. We need your help. The other country still standing is worse off. It's the Soviet Union, USSR to the very far east there. This map doesn't include Asia. So the Asia portion is fine of the Soviet Union. Here's what's happened in the European portion. In the last 6 months of 1941, German forces that had half of Poland already just went conquering east, 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 and they're now within 20 miles of the capital of Moscow. The Soviet Union is about ready to collapse before the United States has shown up to try to help. Very dire situation in Europe. And what's it mean for the Holocaust? The Holocaust has entered its third and final phase, known as the final solution. The mass murder phase is in full blast. By the start of 1942, hundreds of concentration camps are set up with the 6 major death camps operating in Poland. And as German forces went conquering east during the last half of 1941, what came in behind them? Murder squads. 1.5 million people, primarily Jews, have been lined up and shot to death. What summarizes this time period at the start of 42, we'll go to the next slide, is this. And you notice, as it says hate, you see parallels in the news today. Your question to me before. Because when hate leads, the groups do, death and destruction follows. But what made the Holocaust as murderous and destructive as it was is that second word, indifference. One of the things on this journey, what's been very neat, we've been able to get a handful of teachers, generally the common as progressive teachers. We've built tradition with who bring us into the classroom where they have the students read the book before I come. So I don't do this presentation, I lead discussion. And that's high educational impact for students. I'm talking middle school, high school, even college on occasion. And one of the words that we help students really learn that teachers like is that word indifference. Because when it happens in people's lives, and it's a common attitude that affects behavior, is when they hit the teen years. How many parents in the room with the teenagers ever had teenagers? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Indifference will start in there. Now, as teenagers, it's generally harmless, but the problem for too many people is it carries off into adulthood. What does the word indifference mean? That's right, you don't care. What made the Holocaust as destructive as it was, so many people would not care. Who could have helped? Franz and Weihnacht were different than most. They cared. Now I'm going to take you to their countries. Go to the next slide. The Netherlands. Now, and it's Sylvie, right? Yep. So you're not allowed to comment on these things. You actually lived in the Netherlands. Well, not at the moment, yet, later on.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to throw out some questions and comments. She was born and raised in the Netherlands?
Well, I lived there till I was 5.
Oh, all right. All right. Well, then maybe you can help out the audience a little bit there. She hasn't been there that much. Have you been back to visit sometimes?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, our Netherlands expert will be here. I've been there a few times myself. Paul just went there a short time ago. Well, this country, in terms of area, size, and again, I'll generalize when I say this is not true in every case. Americans, we often don't know our geography well around the world. If we had the bigger map of Europe back on, we said, first one to find Holland on the map wins. Some would be searching for a while. Because area-wise, it's small. You drive 3-4 hours in any direction, you hit the whole country. You're not out of Northern California, you're close. So you can get a bunch of Hollands into California area-wise. But it's densely populated. This is the most densely populated country in Europe today. Nearly 17 million people live there now. Just prior to the war beginning, 9 million. Well, when the war broke out in September of 1939, the Dutch government said, we're going to be neutral. Let the big boys fight it out. Leave us out of it. And they were neutral during World War I, and we're left out of it. And there's a country to the south of the Netherlands. Smaller in area, also densely populated, said, yes, we want to be neutral too. Belgium. But that's not going to be their choice. There's a major country on the eastern border. You've seen a portion of it. It's called Germany. And they're making decisions of who we're going to leave neutral for now and who not. The spring 1940 offensive by the German forces is underway, and the Netherlands is on the list. In the wee hours of May 10th, 1940, German forces come over the eastern border and start attacking. Now, the Dutch government knew that neutrality thing wasn't going to work. Suddenly the Germans are showing up. So they had forces in place, and they're actually putting up a pretty good fight in the beginning. But the so-called powers of Britain and France are not going to be able to coordinate much useful aid, so Holland is pretty much on its own. And again, don't mind the French this. 10 days later, they come under attack and surrender in less than a month. Poor little Holland, pretty much on its own, will surrender in less than 1 week. 1 week. By the way, as I've had occasionally on my journey here, and even one time in my journey, I got invited to speak at the Dutch consulate in San Francisco. That audience had 2/3 who were Dutch related. They all were yelling before I finished the question, 5 days! They remember it like it was yesterday because the scars run deep. And here's what's happening as the week is going on. Even though the Dutch forces are putting up a good fight, the German commanders turned to the Dutch government and said, ultimatum, here's your choice. You either surrender now or we start bombing. And we're going to go after your commercial port city of Rotterdam first. See, kind of central to the west, Amsterdam, the largest city, Rotterdam due south, near the North Sea. By the way, how many people have been to the Netherlands? Fantastic, this group travels, I like it. Good. By the way, those who've been there, did you get to Rotterdam?
Yes.
More than average. Tourists often don't go to Rotterdam, and what I'm explaining happened is one of the reasons why. But how many of you have been to other parts of the country besides Amsterdam? No. Great. I will be coming back later for geography assistance, so keep that in mind. Well, here's what's happening. They give this ultimatum to the government. We're going to bomb Rotterdam unless you surrender now. So the Prime Minister, in consultation with his cabinet and with the Queen, Queen Wilhelmina, talked to them. You know what? They say to their commanding general, General Winkleman, how's it look out there? Well, we're putting up a fight, but we're not going to last forever with the manpower and firepower the Germans had. Well, they said, General Winkleman, here's what we want. We don't want that destruction on our soil. You negotiate surrender terms with the Germans. Okay, I will. And then, the day before the official surrender is made, they say, goodbye! A ship is waiting for the royalty and the Dutch government that takes them across sea into London, England. Well, they will be a government in exile for the rest of the world. Good luck, Dutch people. How they go? And General Winkleman negotiates surrender terms. The Germans say, thank you very much. And then they said this, excuse us, we had some miscommunication. They bombed Rotterdam to smithereens. That's why I'm saying tourists often don't go there today. It's a rebuilt city. But at this point in time, 1,000 people get killed. 85,000 are now homeless, and the industrial center of this important commercial city wiped out. And a new day begins in the Netherlands now. The Germans will put their own man in charge as the ruling governor. Like Adolf Hitler, he was an Austrian Nazi named Archduke. And his rule with his henchmen of this country and the occupation will last 5 miserable years, the worst and longest of all the countries in Western Europe. And each year of that occupation will be worse than the one before. And here's what you're going to see during this occupation. 4 main areas of emphasis of how the Germans ran this country. First, control the flow of information, the news that people receive. Well, that's easier to do in the 1940s than it would be today. In the 1940s, what were the major sources of how people got their news? That's it, those two, newspaper and radio. Television, soon coming, not quite there yet, and internet. What the heck is that? Al Gore had not invented it yet. So what you start to see is Nazi censorship takes over the newspapers. Their propaganda rules the day. Back before 1940 was out, nationwide edict from the German authorities, don't listen to your radio. You can look at it, don't listen to it. Now that's a hard order to enforce. And here's what's bothering the Germans as the war is moving on. They think a lot of Dutch are ignoring that order. And if you were, you start to pick up secret broadcasts coming out of London. The BBC. Radio Orange, where the Dutch government in exile set up its own radio station, where even the Queen would broadcast its time zone. And if you were listening to those secret broadcasts by mid-1943, this is what you would be hearing. A year and a half before, the Germans were dominating the whole continent of Europe. Now they're starting to suffer defeat after defeat on the battlefield. The Germans do not want anybody to know this. You don't want to give people hope. September 1943. Nationwide edict of the German authorities in the Netherlands. All Dutch citizens, turn in your radios. Many will just, okay, here we go, follow the orders. They'll conduct raids on people's houses to collect radios. They're going to work hard to do it with 9 million people. Interesting, when that order came, this guy named Franz Weihnacht, you know what he did? He hid his radio. He never turned it in. Franz was different than most who just went along and followed the orders. Keep that in mind. Now, second emphasis of how they ran the country was this. Exploit all resources. Well, this country's pretty well developed economically, and even more so today. And there's resources ahead that the Germans need. And parts and machines, raw material, food. They take it from the Netherlands and off to Germany. See, they've got this huge war effort to keep manufacturing and feeding their troops and their people. They did not care the economic effect on the Netherlands. And in terms of exploiting resources, this is what scared the Dutch the most. People. See, the Germans are suffering a major labor shortage. They do not have enough able-bodied men, young men, let alone women, to work the factories and fields to support this huge war effort they have going on. By the way, where were those people? Who would have been doing those jobs? That's right, and actually too, when you think about it, the military one we call World War II, they had over 10 million soldiers involved. This other one we call the Holocaust, they had thousands upon thousands of people involved running those hundreds upon hundreds of concentration camps. So how did they make up for the labor shortage? This was the term, forced labor. Meaning you got noticed, go work in Germany! And this was happening in many of the countries they occupied, they were shipping people off to go work in Germany. Once the Dutch figured that out, that was not a job you wanted. During the course of the war, 350,000 Dutch citizens went to work in Germany into forced labor. 30,000 do not come home alive when this is over. Some came home disabled. That's not a job you want. Later in the war, Franz Weihnachter got notice. You're going to need to go work in Germany. First you go to medical evaluation. A major obstacle you have to try to overcome. Now, third emphasis of how the Germans ran the country was this. Stamp out resistance in any form it shows. Well, when the Dutch got conquered, they weren't ready to resist. I think if it happened here tomorrow, we wouldn't be either. But in time, you're going to start to see some resistance-type efforts. Don't get involved. Because the German response was always brutal. For instance, you're going to see about a half dozen major strikes and protests throughout the war. Here was one of the first really big ones. Often called the workers' strike or the February strike that occurred in late February of 1941. For those who've been there, if you've been to Amsterdam, you will see a statue of a dock worker in what was then the Jewish section, no longer. It's there today, and it represents this strike. And here's what happened. This is the backstory of it. Prior to the strike kicking off, for the first time, the Germans round up young Jewish men, over 400, and ship them off to a concentration camp out of Amsterdam. And why did they go after these young Jewish men? Because they were fighting back against Dutch Nazi hoodlums and beating you know what out of them. So the Germans didn't like that, ship them off. Now this is what surprised the Germans a bit, because it's about the only time this happened in all of Europe during the Holocaust and the war. Non-Jews rose up because of an action taken against Jews. And it was led by the first real resistance group to get organized in the Netherlands, the Communists. And they said, dock workers, let's go out and strike and protest because of this oppressive rule of the Germans and this brutality and persecution of our fellow Jews. It's not just dock workers hitting the streets. What you start seeing in Amsterdam is over 100,000 people are out protesting. Day two, the strike is spread through a half dozen cities around the country. The German authorities are extremely upset at this disturbance. Troops go in, massive arrest, firing the crowd at one time. Sorry, we killed 9 people, wounded 45. And then they go after the ringleaders, who they thought were instigating this awful disturbance. They didn't care whether they got that right. And nearly 20 of those so-called ringleaders will all get executed. And that's what you're going to start to see. In time, as resistance groups get organized, do not be in my neighborhood. As an example, again, a person who said he had family there, he grew up in the Netherlands after the war, but he said 10 to 1. That was kind of what the talk was. If we hit one of theirs, quite often Dutch Nazis helping them, they're going to go kill 10 innocents. As an example where this really starts to trigger. February 1943. When the high-ranking Dutch Nazi traitors helping the Germans run the country was stationed in the capital city of The Hague there, to the west, south of Amsterdam on the North Sea. And one night in February 1943, his doorbell rings. He opens it up, and 2 Dutch communist resistance fighters targeting this man, shot him dead. When the head of the SS operations in the Netherlands, the security arm of the Nazi machine to enforce its will on people, his name was Hans Rader, the most brutal and feared man in the country. When he got wind of this, he ordered 50 people rounded up and executed and made sure the public would know this. And this would be the start of a reign of terror that would be commonplace throughout the Netherlands through the rest of 1943, all of 1944, until the country was fully liberated in May of 1945. That was life in the Netherlands, among many other examples I could tell. Very brutal, very oppressive. And that's where Franz and Weihnachter lived. Not a place you want to be. And I said there were 4 main areas of emphasis of how they ran the country. I've covered 3. Here's the 4th. And it was the number 1 priority. Persecute, isolate, and then deport on the trains to the death camps in Poland the entire Jewish population they could get their hands on. Prior Prior to the occupation, the Jewish population in the Netherlands was approximately 1.5% of the total. Now this doesn't happen all at once, it just kind of builds up steadily over time. And before 1940 was out, the early edicts that start to target Jews begin. Here was one of the early ones. All Jews in the Netherlands, if you work in civil service jobs, government positions, or in university positions like professors, you're now out of that job because you're a Jew. Well, that wasn't many Dutch Jews at this point anyway. Only now are they beginning to get these opportunities and the education needed for them. But the most prominent Jew in the country was affected by the edict. It was a man named Lodewijk Visser. His job in the Netherlands then was equivalent to the job that John Roberts has in our country today. What's he do? Yes, Chief Justice of the American Supreme Court. Lodewijk Visser had an equivalent role in the Dutch High Court. By the end of November 1940, 42 rather, he's now out of that job because he's a Jew. And his fellow justices in response said, that's correct, nothing. Green light, the Germans say, let's continue. And they will. And throughout the rest of 1941, edict after edict comes out targeting the Jewish population, that by the end of the year, 1941, here was the effect. The Jewish population now has been isolated and removed from the non-Jewish population. Working with non-Jews, can't do. Going to school with non-Jews, can't do. Attending university, Jews are now prohibited. Have your own business, taken away. Go out and enjoy social recreational activities like anybody else, Jews are no longer allowed. And by the start of 1942, 60% of the Jewish population already lived in Amsterdam, but 40% in the other parts of the country are now getting shifted into the city of Amsterdam, into ghettos. By May of 1942, if you went out in public as a Jew, you had to wear that yellow badge, humiliation in your clothes that says, we know you're a Jew. And by July 1942, the trains are cranking. And they're taking the Jewish population bit by bit from Amsterdam and shipping them off to the death camps in Poland, primarily Sobibor and Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, many people don't know what's going on, because the Nazi propaganda didn't announce this. In fact, the Nazi message to the whole population, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, was this. We're sending the Jews to work camps in Germany. False. And to reinforce this propaganda, with some of those early arrivals to the death camps, if you survived the train rides getting there, when they got off, they had postcards for them already filled out. All you had to do was sign your name. And this, in effect, was the message in the postcards. Dear friends and family, life at the camp, it's not so bad. Sure, you got to work, but that's not so bad. Food's decent. We look forward to seeing you soon. And that goes back to the people waiting anxiously in Amsterdam. I guess I don't need to worry after all. And this is just going to continue and continue and continue. And by the end of September 1943, the entire Jewish population they could get their hands on in the Netherlands had been deported. Now the Germans had this inkling. We didn't get them all. If you were a Jew in the Netherlands at this point in time, many don't know what's happening. They're captured, they're deported. But some figure out doom is coming. Your best hope, go into hiding. But you're going to need help. Would anybody help? Contrary to popular belief about the Netherlands, the answer to that question is not many. Not many. Some yes, but not many. In fact, what do you think the vast majority of the Dutch population is doing during this period of oppression and persecution and tough economic times? What are most trying to do? That's right. Can't blame them. They're just trying to survive, head down, don't worry about anybody else. Hope I can still feed my family, and I hope I don't get called into forced labor. Sorry. Now, some of those people, amidst the indifference, and this is only about 97% of the population, do feel sympathetic to their fellow Jews, because they certainly seem carted off and they don't seem to come back. But if you rang their door and said, please help, they would not open their door. How come?
Fear.
Yes, there was fear. What was the fear over? You get involved helping hide people the Germans are after, especially Jews, when they find out,
They're going to get killed too.
you get to go on a certain train ride too. You get to go to the concentration camps where death awaits you sooner or later. Poland more commonly will execute you on the spot. No thanks. That fear was real. Well, of the people among the Dutch who play an active role in this war, approximately 2% or so of the population, you can put them in two groups. And you see my hands, everybody. The one on the left means that's a little bit more in number than the one on the right. The one on the right, resistance. So I'll save them for last. The one on the left, the collaborators and sympathizers with the Nazis. One thing that gets overlooked. As Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party go conquering throughout all of Europe, they had a lot of help in most every country they went into from the local population, including the Netherlands. In fact, prior to the war starting in the 1930s, in many countries throughout Europe, including the United States, little fascist or Nazi-type parties were getting formed. Not just in Germany or Austria. And the Dutch had their own. It was known by its initials, NSB. A few thousand at most prior to the war. And the Dutch looked at them as extremist idiots, and they don't like right-wingers or left-wingers, and they ignored those NSBers as just fools. They're harmless. Now we're a year into the occupation. 100,000 people have signed up and joined the NSB. How come? They want to be on a winning team. Germans are going to win this war anyway. They're dominating. And if you're in the NSB, see, the Germans need help running the government. Some of those people that were already in those jobs who didn't look too enthused, Arthur Seyss-Inquart said, go find something else to do. NSBer, come in, take their job. Are you capable? No. You loyal? Good enough. And so NSBer meant you got a lot of opportunity. You didn't have to live by the strict food rationing cards as much of the population. You ate better. You don't have to worry about being called into forced labor. You get positions of power, privilege. And by the way, when we round up the Jews and send them away, now some are poor, don't have much, but those who have something, we looked, the Germans did, and said, NSBer, we'll share a little with you. Thanks for helping out. The Netherlands had the third largest Nazi party in all of Europe now. And you also had to worry about others who may not be an NSBer, just sympathize. I'll give you an example of one that scares me. The actual prime minister of the government of Netherlands, at the time the government went into exile, a man named Dirk-Jan de Fahr. So he goes off with the government exile in London. 5 months after being there, Queen Wilhelmina says, Dirk, don't like what you're preaching. You're on diplomatic assignment now to the East Indies, Indonesia today. Dirk doesn't go there. He gets out of the Netherlands and guess where he comes back to? The Netherlands, and the Germans gladly take him and say, what do you need? Here's your materials. See, Dirk publishes a pamphlet that goes nationwide in the Netherlands during the war. Because this was his message that he put into that pamphlet. The Germans are going to win the war anyway. Don't cozy up with the British and the Allies. Cooperate, get along with the Germans. So there were people like that. And by the way, you want to make some extra money during these hard times. Just call the authorities when you're suspicious about something. Like those people might be hiding somebody. Because they paid you a bounty for it. In fact, one group specialized in it. It's known as the Henneke column. Started by a man named Wim Henneke. And he and his group of bounty hunters, at the height of the deportation that people were trying to get in hiding in 1943, they're going around to round up the Jews. And they get over 8,000 captured, arrested, and deported. Boy, they were making good money. So you had to worry often as much about some of the Dutch as you did about the Germans occupying your country. Now this other group I mentioned, resistance. Now the Dutch had some challenges with their resistance. One, it wasn't one group. At time, and true in other countries too, more than one group got organized, and throughout most of the war, these half dozen or so groups that existed, come and go, were never united with each other. None of them independently ever had the firepower and manpower to match the Germans. And here was one of the other problems if you're in the Dutch resistance and you're doing these dangerous activities like sabotage, hit and run attacks. So now I'm going to go to the people who've been to the Netherlands before, past Amsterdam, raise your hand. There you go. See, in other parts of Europe, you've got one of those dangerous resistance groups that like a hit and run attack. You ran into the mountains. They can't find you there. Deep into the forest. They can't find you there. How many big mountain ranges and deep forests did you find in the Netherlands? That's right. This is a flat country. You will find out, yeah, it's great for bike riding though. That's the best bike riding country in the world. They got bike paths everywhere. And lots of water. The Dutch are the best water civil engineers in the world, otherwise half this country would be flooded. So they figured out how to control that. So if you're in one of these resistance groups, and by the way, don't be in my group, because they'll take out the reprisals on the innocent. If you're in one of these groups, then if you could hold your breath underwater a long time, you'll do just fine. So what was happening to many of these Dutch resistance fighters? They're getting caught, imprisoned, deported to concentration camps, sometimes executed. Many of them had to go into hiding. Very tough, dangerous work. Of all the resistance groups in the Netherlands, the one that will become the largest and most effective was known by its initials, LO. Full name in Dutch, Landelijke Organisatie voor Hulp en Onderduikers. English translation, the National Organization for Helping People in Hiding. During the course of the war, the LO will help hide from the German authorities 300,000 people. Quite effective. Little side note. So unusual for the time period of the 1940s. One of the founders and leaders of the LO was a woman. Second side note to that, how dangerous this work was. She later got betrayed, captured, deported to a concentration camp in Germany where she will die before the war was out. Dangerous work. Well, by the time the LO really had a network operating around the country, mid-1943, too late to help many of the Jews. Out of that 300,000, about 25,000 or so Jews do make it into hiding. But because they were the #1 target, over a third of them get caught and deported. So the non-Jews who got involved in this risky, dangerous business of trying to help hide people, you had far more non-Jews willing to help hide non-Jews. Hiding a Jew? Well, I don't know if I want to go that far. It may be just a little too risky. Well, Franz and me, Weihnachter, they went that far. Now I'm going to talk about them. And let me give you a bigger picture about them first. As we go to the next slide, and you see the book cover for a moment. There again is the title, Two Among the Righteous Few, A Story of Courage in the Holocaust. When this book was being put together by my publisher, there's a person whose job in the process was design book covers. And when it was her turn, she called me and she said, I want to understand the meaning of your title so I can design the cover accordingly. And I think she did a great job of capturing the mood of this story with that cover. Well, I said, if you look at the various words of the title, the most significant is the word righteous. And it comes from a place called, next slide please, Yad Vashem. How many people have heard of the place? A few of you have. Good. What is it and where is it? It's in Jerusalem, Israel. What is it? What is it? No, that's a different spot in Jerusalem. Good guess.
It's the Holocaust Museum.
Yeah, that's it. The Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, Israel. The most prominent in the world still today. It began in 1953 through an act of the Israeli parliament so the Holocaust would not be forgotten. In 1953, the word Holocaust did not exist in our vocabulary. Nobody even talked about the subject, and they formed a museum for it. And that museum has expanded greatly over the years. I've been there twice myself. I'll be hitting there a third time coming up next month, which is now, starts tomorrow. I'm headed out there. Well, there's a section within the museum. It's called, we'll go to the next slide, The Righteous Among the Nations. And that's where the word righteous comes from in the book title. And this little section of this big museum is supported by the grounds. And this is one museum where most are just buildings and then you leave. This one has grounds that you walk. And what you're going to see in the grounds that they refer to as the Avenue of the Righteous are plaques and trees planted for people who've gotten this very special honor of righteous among the nations. Well, who were such people? These were the non-Jews who, during the course of the Holocaust, risked their own lives to try and help save the lives of Jews. You notice the title of the book is not Two Among the Righteous, Many. And not a lot of people who did this. One that I think a lot of you in this room would be aware of, one of the early ones when the honors started happening in 1963, thanks to the movies as well. Who?
Schindler.
Oscar Schindler. Schindler's List won the Academy Award in 1993.
Corrie ten Boom.
And Dutch's Corrie ten Boom, yes, The Hiding Place, her book and movie as well, is also recognized as righteous among the nations. Well, as we go to the next slide, Franz, and her full name was Hermina, being for short, and she wasn't. Franz and Hermina Weihnachter are two Oscar Schindlers. They too got this heroic honor for what they did that I'm about to share with you. When this honor came in their lives, it was late 1983. And unfortunately at that point in time, meaning the wife had already passed away. She died in 1980, so never knew about it. Franz, the husband, was still alive to receive the honor. And he lived to 1994, almost the age of 86. So I'm going to talk about who they were and what they ended up doing that later earns this heroic honor. As we go to the next slide, we're going to take you back into their country, the Netherlands. And you see that red arrow in southeastern Netherlands. That's pointing to where they lived. They lived in a little town named Dieden, in an area of little towns and villages where most of this country is cities large and small. So they're countryside. And life for them in this area at this time period, the 1940s, what their life was like was typical of most everybody else in their area. Three things. One, raise a family. That was important for them. Parents in the room, I got some? Raise your hand. Don't, it's okay to admit it. It's all right. Catch this. By the end of 1942, they already had 4 small children under the age of 5. Yes, you don't even have to be a parent to start cringing to death off it. Hey, they wanted to be a parent. And they wanted to have a big family, so here they go. Also, what was important in their life? Work hard. And they lived the traditional roles of the time period. Mina is the woman, you're supposed to run the household. Oh, she ran it. Franz is the husband, you work to support your family. And he did. He was a semi-skilled laborer. He worked at a grain mill 1 town over from Dean. Were they well off? No. Is anybody in this area well off? Not really. But did they get by and feed their family? Yes, they were okay. And the last thing that was important for them in this area, be good Catholics. In other parts of the country, be good Protestants. In those days, throughout all of Western Europe, not so much today, whatever Christian faith you were, the role of that church was so important in your life and had great influence. Typical of that, who was the #1 authority figure in their area? The local parish priest. And when he told you to do, you do. And when he said, don't do it, don't do it. And be at church every Sunday. That was their lives. Pretty ordinary people. But they weren't. And after the war broke out, Franz took a leave of absence from his job at the mill. And he thought he could make a little bit more money by getting meat and eggs from farmers in the countryside near where he lived. And then he would get on a train and travel 2 hours to the major cities in the West, like The Hague, Amsterdam, selling this food to people in the cities. A couple things to keep in mind. This is what's called a black market business. It ain't legal. You're not allowed to be doing that. But people willing to pay for this valuable food because it's scarce. The Germans have taken a lot of cattle and meat and eggs away, so you see someone showing up who's good at selling this, you might buy and pay under the table. And Franz was a good salesman doing it. Spring 1943. Franz was on one of these business trips in Amsterdam. And he calls upon this doctor acquaintance he's done business with before. Before he leaves the meeting with the doctor turns to him and says, would you be willing to help? And the doctor explains. You see, we got this young girl hiding here in the city of Amsterdam. And we'd love to get her out to the countryside where you live. What's your town again? Franz says, Dean. Yes, let's say you take her out to Dean for 3 weeks. That way she can get a little better fresh air and a little better food. Oh, and by the way, she's Jewish. So would you be willing to help? And this was Franz's response. Okay. Not exactly knowing what he's getting into, but he's a helpful guy. You've asked for his help, so sure. And he's going to meet that young girl before the night is out. He only knows her by her false Dutch identity name, Freitje, not her real name. And by the way, you know, she's actually almost 15, not far away, 14. Because she's small in stature, he thinks maybe she's 12. You don't sneak somebody out of the city during the day. Too many Germans, let alone Dutch Nazis around and suspicious people. You go out well into the night on the train, and that's how he had to go. He finally does sneak Freitje out of Amsterdam and gets home to Dieden around midnight. There were no cell phones in those days. So when he's not home by supper time as he normally would have been, what do you think his wife Meen was thinking and feeling? Yes. He's sitting in jail somewhere. She's very worried. I'm not sleeping tonight. And then finally around midnight, he shows up unexpectedly with this young girl. And he explains briefly to his wife, we're going to have this young girl stay with us here for 3 weeks. And this was Meen's response. Well, it's late. Let's get her to bed. He dodged the bullet there. And he knew business has just begun for Franz and Meen Weihnachter. Let me tell you a little bit about Freitje. She wasn't Dutch. She was a German Jewish girl. She and her siblings, she was one of 6, were able to get out of Germany at the end of 1938 after that horrific event known as Kristallnacht, the massive riot and rampage in Germany and Austria against Jews. Well, the Dutch government was willing to take in, the term for it was called, in just a few thousand, unaccompanied Jews, as long as there'd be Dutch Jewish families to take care of them. So Freitje and her brothers and sisters will make it into the homes of Dutch Jewish families in Amsterdam, and life will go on. They will never see their parents again. Well, she learns Dutch, she goes to school, she sees her siblings who are nearby fairly often, she makes new friends. In fact, one of the girls she would play with in her area, right in the neighborhood, just a block away, was a girl similar in age to her. And this girl came from a German Jewish family, but they got out of Germany in the early 1930s as a whole family. They had an opportunity then. Made a nice life for themselves in Amsterdam. But the problem with this girl and her family and others like them, if you try to stay hiding in the cities, as the occupation got on, your chance of survival got less. You often were going to get caught. This girl and her family got caught. This was a girl, you've been to her house, Anne Frank. Well, Fraser, after being there now for a week at the Vine Office, Minnie comes to Franz one day and says, you know what, Franz? I've been talking with Fraser, and you know what I think I figured out? I think she's Jewish. Did you know that? Franz said, yeah, I knew. Well, she's got a younger brother still hiding in Amsterdam. Go get him! Not the trained Franz will go, they're going to sneak him up. Call him Fritz, not his real name. Short time after that, through these two former teachers in Amsterdam, they come out on the train, because they've heard about this Franz Weihnachter guy, through acquaintances, and they come out on the train with a girl of 17, who happens to be Jewish. They bring her to the home of Franz and Weihnachter and say, sure, we'll take her in. And now there's 3 Jewish children refugees in their home with their 4 small children. Do they recognize what they've gotten into? Not fully. It's illegal, and as we talked earlier, consequences, dangerous and deadly. But they're going to continue anyway. And then comes the pivotal moment. A stranger shows up on Franz's doorstep one day and starts talking to him right away. Doesn't say what his real name is, only goes by this code name, Long John. And initially as he's talking to Franz, he's making Franz very nervous. Because this Long John fellow seems to know that Franz and Weihnachter have 3 Jewish children refugees in their home. So Franz is wondering, how does this guy know this? Is he a spy? Is he with the police to arrest me? Franz is wondering. And then this Long John fellow says this, you could be of help to us. Who is this guy? He's with the LO, the resistance group that helps hide people. Likely the doctor acquaintance in Amsterdam, also part of the LO. They've been talking. Franz Weihnachter seems helpful. Countryside, good location. So Long John starts to explain. And Mean has joined Franz for the conversation. And he tells them, we're trying to get the remaining Jews still hiding in the cities out before it's too late. Now certainly you can't fit them all in your own home here in the countryside. But here's what we'd like to do, if you're willing. We can give you money to fund an operation. When you'd like to go around the local towns in your area, see if you can recruit people to take somebody in their home, and then you can pay them for it. Now I don't want to kid you, he says. This could be risky, and this could be dangerous. But would you be willing to help? And Franz and Mean looked at each other and without hesitation went, okay! Not exactly knowing what they're getting involved with, but they want to be helpful. And now they go forward, and this takes over their whole life, day in and day out. As Franz gets word of people coming out or to go in the cities and sneaking them out, at the same time he's going around the local towns seeing who he can recruit to help. And he tells good stories to get people to participate. While their stories may not have been true, there was truth to them. You know, the Germans have displaced people from their homes in Amsterdam. Their names are going to be on a list. When I reflect back on the many challenges and dangers that Franz will encounter with his wife Mean right there in support, I am stunned that they actually persisted. Most people would have quit, said too dangerous and I have 4 little children to worry about. But they will keep going. And among the many challenges and dangers they encounter, I'm just going to highlight 2 briefly. One, the term you hear is betrayed, meaning this. Franz had placed a Jewish individual in somebody else's home. And one day those people are calling for Franz, Franz, you got to come. Franz, this Jewish person we have here, got exposed. That means word will travel to the authorities, which means not only they're going to come get this person from us, they're going to come get us. We've been betrayed. Get him out of here. And Franz could not convince those people to keep the individual any longer. Mad scramble, try to find another place. At the height of this, Franz and Mean typically had 8 to 10 Jewish refugees in their own home with their 4 little children. One crowded place. And the second among many challenges they encountered deals with the first adults that Franz and Mean took in their own home after the 3 children. It was a young married couple, similar in age to them. The couple, Lou was the husband and Berlin the wife, got out of Amsterdam a short time after each other, not together. Lou was able to come to the Weihnachter home directly through the help of the LO, and his wife, through the LO, came out to southeastern Netherlands first, and her point of contact was a guy named Franz Weihnachter, who placed her at the home of a friend. They often did not want young married couples staying together anywhere. Well, Emmeline, where she was staying and helping out in this house, got betrayed one day. It was near midnight now, and the woman that had her in her house said, "Sorry, I can't keep you here any longer. You're going to have to leave now." It was near midnight. I was given directions to the home of Franz and me Bonhoeffer, which is where you should go, and I'm told it's maybe 20 minutes down the road. I've never been there myself, but here, go. And there Angeline is, in the dark of night, in an unfamiliar area, frightened, in tears, hoping the direction she was given her accurate. 20 minutes later, she works her way down the road. She makes a guess and rings the doorbell of a house, and luckily she guessed right. Franz opened up the door, sees her there in tears, says, "Come on, come on." Well, that wakes up the whole house. And who comes down amidst the commotion? Her husband, Lou. A very emotional reunion. And the next morning, Franz and me say to Lou and Angeline, "That's okay, you can stay here together." But a short time after that, Angeline has a secret she cannot keep secret any longer. She's already pregnant. How do you have a baby under these circumstances of Nazi Germany occupation? Near impossible. Well, when this was finally over, and I'm not talking 2 weeks or even 2 months, this will go on for nearly 2 years. Franz, with the support of his wife, Meen, will save the lives of over 24 Jews from certain death, and miraculously, nobody will be caught. You can see as we go to the next slide, why later they earn that heroic honor of righteous among the nations. Now, the last thing I'll cover, or open up the floor to your questions, deals with my own meaningful personal connection to the story and its heroes. One I understand so much more in depth today than before I got involved with this story. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book to give you insight into it. As I've been on this journey now, well into 5 years, have had a wonderful supporter helping me along the way. I brought her here with me today. It happens to be my wife, Leah Bars, and here she is. Well, it happens to be that my wife, like Sylvie, are actually, she and her family are from the Netherlands, and they immigrated to the United States. They did so when she was in the 8th grade, near 14 years old. They came to a place called Los Angeles. And for those who travel in the Netherlands, much better weather in Los Angeles. Well, after settling in, and we do have a few students in the room, see, initially as they settled in Los Angeles, she took to American television. I guess today might be more video games. And her mother got worried, would she ever get off the couch and do her homework? But she actually graduates high school and goes on to university and graduates from a place called UCLA. And she starts a career as a teacher down in Los Angeles. After a few years, she moves to San Francisco. I think you've heard of the place. And continues a fine career in education, the bulk of it as a school psychologist. Raises 2 daughters along the way. Young adult daughters doing fine today in their lives. Later in life, she picks me up. It has now been over 9 years, and she always tells me, "Oh, what we have is wedded bliss." Some of you understand this over here. Wedded bliss we have. This is a tough crowd you got over here. All right. Well, it is May 2009. At that point in my wife Leah's life, it has been 25 years since she was last back to her original homeland of the Netherlands. And there's nobody left, friends or family, that she knows anymore, but a burning desire to go back to the country and see places she'd never seen as a kid. And I'd never been at all. So she's talking, we got to do this special trip. And finally we go in May of 2009 for 6 weeks. Having a wonderful time, and then we stumbled into something by accident that I thought was so significant. I end up writing a letter to her 2 daughters, Shoshana and Alana, and that's the piece I'm going to read to you now. One last thing before I do. If you knew my wife as a child in the Netherlands, less would you know her by her name Leah, and much more by her Dutch nickname Ineke, so please keep that in mind. Chapter 1, Historic Moment. Dear Shoshana and Alana, today is Tuesday, May 26, 2009. I'm writing to share more than just travel stories from a wonderful journey your mom and I are having. I want to document something to you that I hope you'll find of much value for your own family history. Well, I know some of the history, and you probably do too. Coming in contact with the reality of it merges mind and heart into something of great significance. I will explain shortly. Being in the Netherlands, much more than in the United States, one is reminded of World War II and the Holocaust as well. When we started our trip in Amsterdam, we visited the Anne Frank House. It is a wonderful educational museum. Last Friday, we visited the museum and site of Camp Westerbork. Before World War II, there were 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands. over 75% perished during the Holocaust. Westerbork was the deportation center the Nazis used to ship the Dutch Jews off to the death camps in Poland. We arrived last evening in the city of Eindhoven in the south of the country. Of the places your mom's family lived prior to immigrating to the U.S., Eindhoven was where they were the longest. Before arriving there yesterday, we stopped in an old town named Brounstein. It is the big small town in an area of villages in a southern section of the country. It is also near where your grandparents were hidden during the war. As we stop and walk around the charming 1600s historic downtown of Brounstein, all 2 blocks of it, we spot a tourist information office. We go in, and your mom asked the staff members about the location of, next slide please, of an old church in the nearby small town of Dieden, and of the home that once belonged to a Franz Weinacher is still next to it. For the older folks of this area, which the 3 office people on hand were, the name of Franz Weinacher is a notable one. They tell your mom not only how to get to this church, but also that one of the Weinacher sons still lives in this particular house. So off we go down the road to Dieden. About 10 minutes later, we find the church in question. We park your car there and walk over to the house next door. As we walk up the driveway, we see a few people sitting at a table in the front yard on this warm day, and we see, next slide please, we see the word shalom written on the front side of the house, probably a foot in size. Your mom boldly walks up to the gentleman sitting there and says in Dutch, "Hello, I'm in a kabars." A roar goes up along with a warm handshake. This man and his wife sitting with him know who Ina Kabars is, and much more the significance related to her. In the next few minutes, the Dutch starts flying and phone calls start happening. Within 10 minutes, his youngest sibling, Irene, drives over and joins in a lively discussion, which, by the way, was all in Dutch, so I could only watch. The man who has greeted us is Franz Weinacher Jr. He is the youngest son of the aforementioned Franz Weinacher. His father, Franz, with the support of his mother, Mien, saved your grandparents and your mom, baby Ineke, during World War II. They all survived the Holocaust because this Catholic man and his wife hid them and other Jews and helped even more hide from the Nazis. Do you recognize the significance of this moment? Franz, the son, and his wife, also named Irene, visited Israel themselves last year. They showed us a blown-up picture of the memorial plaque and tree planted in Yad Vashem's Avenue, the Righteous section, in honor of their parents, which is when the historic significance of what I was witnessing really hit me. After visiting for over an hour, they've invited us to come back Wednesday evening. They have 3 other siblings who are all alive and living in the local area. So your mom will likely meet more of the Weinacher family who she last saw 25 years ago. Thank you for the moves on the house. Thank you. They could help pay for things. So that helps. 2 is that he was getting funded from us. Once he got hooked up with the LO and this network that they had him build, that was helping pay for it. One of his best allies in this was a local government official, a man named Corfondor. Thank goodness for him there, because he becomes his eyes and ears of what's going on to warn him of things, but part of his job is tax the farmers. And he had an arrangement with the farmers as he got involved helping Franz. You leave a little behind, I tax you a little less. And then he would call for Franz, you can go over here to this bakery, this place, and pick up some food for your family and others. Through those different methods, they were able to keep everybody fed well enough through this whole time period. And occasionally, because they're their countryside area, on occasion, a little beef here, a little chicken here, which was not common in the country, so they got by. Great question here. Let's get some more here. And I want to make sure we always get this one out here. So I'll go to this nice lady with the glasses who knows her history. What's your name?
Heidi.
Heidi, if you would.
So what happened when you came back for that visit with the family that Wednesday?
Good question, Heidi. Yes, what happened? Well, that's how I just finished reading this piece. You know, they've been advised to come back Wednesday evening and so Monday late afternoon. I always like to answer it in the context of our lives here today. Now, there's 5 Weinacher siblings. The 5th was born, and she comes to meet us there, Irene, after the war. We had shown up unexpectedly. Imagine one day you got a call from, let's say you had a brother or sister in the area, who calls you one night and says, "Guess who just showed up in town? you remember her? It's like 25 years ago. Oh, yeah, I remember her. Yeah, she's here with her husband. Okay, could you come over tomorrow night to visit with them? Now, here's the answer. So many people I know here in the Bay Area. It would go like this. Oh, I wish I could. But I got this obligation at work, this obligation with the kids, the grandkids. I have technology toys to play with these days. Sorry, send them my regards. When the Weinacher siblings heard, and they think of my wife more by her nickname, Innika. When they heard Innika Barge was in town, please show the last slide. All 5 came that evening. They were not going to miss this opportunity to reconnect with Innika Barge, who you see in that picture with them. This is one of the pictures we have in the book. What was interesting about that night for me in particular, for those who travel in the Netherlands, you know today, the vast majority of the Dutch speak multiple languages, especially English. They, in this picture a few years ago, late 60s, early 70s, grew up in the countryside. They do not speak much English, and I speak even less Dutch. That whole night the conversation was in Dutch, and I did not feel out of place. It was just neat in the 3 hours that we were there, and my wife would translate some things for me who's still fluent in Dutch, just to see the warm, happy reunion going on. And I'll introduce you to the family. On the far right, the oldest, is Nellie. And she became our point person from the family that supported us in putting this book together about their parents. Interesting thing. This is May 2009. We've had subsequent trips to Europe and into the Netherlands on 2 occasions. And when Nellie heard that we were going to be there, she said, come stay with us. So we have spent more time with her, met some of her kids, more of the siblings. And we will be back and staying with Nellie again, coming later this May. Going back, and she knows we're coming and says, yes, come stay with us. Wonderful lady today. She's just recently turned 78. Doesn't look any different than this picture a few years ago. She's 78 going on 50. Yeah, my dear, this lady is so energetic and so warm and friendly that, good luck if you keep up with her. Only one person I know that can, and happens to be my wife, who's also young and energetic, that I can't keep up with. Now, between her and my wife is Franz Jr. He lives in the actual house where all this happened. Today he owns it. It was a rental in those days, so it doesn't look the same. He's remodeled it. And there's my wife, and next to her is the youngest, born after the war, Irene, and the other 2 brothers, Jan and Thijs. So they support us doing this, so thank you, Heidi, for that question there. Take a few more, Nancy.
What do they do now?
Most are retired.
Okay.
We'll talk Nellie in particular. Nellie and her sister Irene, as they were, had their careers and did different things, one of the things they did beyond raising their own kids, they took in foster children.
Oh.
There's a big heart there. Franz Jr. still works. He sells kind of used cars and supports his son, who's a race car driver. So you go to his house, there's just cars all over and mechanical things going on. And then Jan, who's pretty much retired, what he got into, Tice worked for the government until he retired, the one on the far end. Jan collects kind of specialty cars. So he's even traveled to the United States sometimes to get deals, and had his own car. And he still has a dealership that his son runs today, so he's done quite well. So various things, and happily all within 15, 20 miles of one another. Thank you for that question. Let's take a few more before we will wrap up here. Yes?
Are you the only one that has told the story of their family?
Probably beyond the local area, yes. One of the things, and this helped us in this, that they supported. And Irene was the keeper of the book at the time. I don't know whether any exist now. But there was a little self-published Dutch book that a friend of their family put together. And from what they told us, it was based on Franz in the last years of his life, spoke into audio tapes, to talk about his experiences. And Irene and the family gave us that book. That gets incorporated in here. Now, it was like a jigsaw puzzle with some pieces missing, but I built a story and done a lot more around it, and then go back, especially to Nellie, who helped us with this. By the way, the other person, and then sometimes as we did this long-distance interview with Nellie, who gave us a lot more insight and clarity, her answer to some question was, I don't know, ask Freitje. Remember who Freitje was?
Yeah.
Who is she? The first one they took into hiding. Her real name, Shula Schwartz. She lives in a place called Haifa, Israel. And after we did this interview, not that I know I'm fully going to do a book, 2 things I'll mention. At the end of my long-distance interview with Nellie, this was my last question. If we want to take that self-published Dutch book, incorporate it in a book here, and see what you got it published in the United States, would you support that? Now, if she said no, I respect that, I'm done. Her answer was, I would be honored. And I know my siblings would be too. How do you turn away at that point? Well, short time after that interview, we already had this trip set up. We were on our way to Israel. Late April 2010, in person, we met Shula Schwartz. What a wonderful lady, about to turn 88 years old. Now, this is now a few years, 6 years ago we saw her. Still in touch with both of them and her. And coming up first, before we see them, we're going to see Shula Schwartz again. Being that she was a teenager, oh, she had numbers. And she never fully talked about it, so we got a chance to visit with her, and so she supported this too. Great, thank you for your wonderful question here. And any other questions before we go to the final one? Yes?
When are we gonna see the movie?
When you can help provide some financing. We get told, and on this journey, we've been encouraged by it. Thank you for your question about this would make a great feature film. I'm not a Hollywood-connected person. I do have a producer who's trying to do something about it. Been at it for about a year, and it's going to take a little longer. It's like climbing a mountain. But he thinks through his connections and wants to make an independent film that can make it even better. We'll see. So still, fingers and toes crossed, but if you know any great producer resources, financiers, please call them. More help is needed. And we'll go to the gentleman right there before I come back.
I was wondering if you have thought about doing a play right on this.
No, not yet. But maybe one day. Any got people who can help in that front? Let me know. Yes, great. Thank you for your kind of creative, you can see a lot of possibilities this story. Right now I'm just kind of, what's that, Johnny Appleseed person at the moment, is just kind of sharing the story wherever I can go to wherever people will take me. Hopefully a church one day here, so we'll see. Yes, Nancy.
Do you have any idea how many couples like this couple that were active at that time?
Yeah, and then couples, individuals,
Yes.
groups. Well, here's what we know today from Yad Vashem, who's been recognized, which doesn't mean it's complete. Stories come up still. That occasionally they'll investigate, and sure enough, if they meet the criteria of really taking risk and truly helping, and they're non-Jews, yes. Today, there's slightly over 26,000 recognitions at Yad Vashem of righteous among the nations. Whether they be individuals, couples, families. And that number sounds pretty good. But when you look at the scheme of things, and you could add up the number of people who might have been involved in one way, 100,000, 200,000, there were over 300 million people who lived in Europe, let alone around the world, beyond that. So you don't even get to 1% of the population who's going to help. That's why this is so rare and remarkable and unusual. So Sylvie's family and others, thank goodness you could find them, but it was not common, unfortunately. So, what they did, and when I discovered this story, that as I read that piece, see, I knew what that little plaque, when he showed me what that meant. That means something heroic happened here. That plaque from the average righteous. You don't just get that for showing up. Thank you for your good question here. Any final questions before we get to the last one? Yes?
I don't know if I read this correctly, but I read your book.
Don't give it away.
So you said about Yad Vashem, that it
Yad Vashem, yes.
I don't know if you said it all started there.
That's the museum in Israel where the first of the Holocaust museums. Today there's hundreds around the world, but this was the first.
Okay, so the persecution of Jews really just started in Germany.
Correct. And then spread throughout all of Europe into North Africa before it was over after 12 years. Persecution and murder. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. All right, let's get our final question in here. And again, I go to people with glasses because I think they're in a better position to read. And what is your name? Bob. Bob. Did you come with Bob? Mm-hmm. Make sure you get a book afterwards. We'll be ready for you. If you would, nice and loud. Or unless you want your son to do it. Is that your son? Yeah, what is your name?
Parker.
Parker, please.
So whatever happened with that baby?
Could everyone hear him? Yeah. Nice and loud, Parker, one more time.
So whatever happened with that baby?
Good question, Parker. Thank you. Thank you. And what Parker is referring to was I was talking about that young married couple that challenged that she's already pregnant. And actually, and her husband was an architect, I forgot to mention. He also helped design a hiding room in the house for everybody there. I should have mentioned that too. So that's good question, Parker. Do you know the answer? What happened to that pregnant couple and the baby? Do you have an idea? That's why I'm glad you asked it, because we want to make sure you know. That's okay if you don't. That's all right. Has anyone got a guess? And you've read the book, so you can't answer it. That sounds like an informative question. We're playing Jeopardy now.
It's your wife.
Yes. What is your name?
Yada.
Yeah. Thank you for coming today. Well, here's the short answer. Chapter 9. Parker and everybody else that explains it right there. You just leave it at that. But, that's why Yenna and a few of the others, were very glad you pieced things together well. You know what happened to that baby? A little over 9 years ago, I married her and I brought her with me here today. Here she is. Yes, applause and welcome. When I say I have a very meaningful personal connection to the story and its heroes, it doesn't get any more meaningful than personal than this one. I knew about my wife's beginnings before we even married. She talked to me about that and her family as Holocaust survivors. Not many survived either. But today I understand the depth of this so much more. When you think about, that was her parents. Lou and Will, when they moved to the United States, she Americanized her name to Lynn. Lou and Lynn Bars, a young married couple. She's already pregnant when she's arrived at the Weinhoffers. We want to talk about one of the most impossible dilemmas to deal with. It's Nazi Germany occupation. You can't go take a young Jewish woman to the local hospital. That gets reported, gone to a death camp. What a huge dilemma. Franz and me didn't have to do anything about it. They could have even made potentially arrangements with their LO contact to ship them off and send her away and to separate the family. They didn't have to do anything about it. I'm not going to tell you how they pulled this off, but I'll give you just a little bit of insight. Franz and Ming came up with a strategy, although I'm not sure how they'll execute the strategy when they came up with it, and they shared it with her parents who agreed with the strategy. And this was the strategy. However we get that baby born, when we do, we will register her with the authorities as our child, so she could be a baby with our small children rather than a baby in hiding. I said we've been back a couple times since to visit the Weinhoffers, especially Nellie on the far right. And our first visit 2 years later, coming back in 2011, as we were getting ready to leave, and we'd been there 3 days, Nellie, in a little bit of English she speaks, she says to me, "When are you coming back?" So that's when you know you had a good visit. And then in Dutch, with tears in her eyes, she hugs this lady closely and says, "Dag, mijn oorlogzuster." Goodbye, my war sister. She's a reminder of them how proud they are of their parents. Because their parents performed a miracle, and they got this baby born and safe. And I say thank God for the courage and compassion of Franz and Weinhofer. Thank you all. Thank you.